very much, Dr. Yasmin. It was very interesting talk to enhance our knowledge about media and democracy, populist leadership, their strategies, social media, and social polarization. I hope it's enhanced our knowledge about this area of research. Now we are going towards our next keynote speaker, and I would request Dr. Kelly, you please come again and deliver your keynote speech.
Thank you for your patience and your tolerance. Pardon me for relying on technology other than print on paper. As I said, it's been 14 years since I was last at this august university. I always start my university classes with a question for students. Why am I here at the front of the room speaking and you sitting in the audience only listening? You may well be wondering the same thing right now. Why do I get to talk today and you only listen? As I do for my journalism students at Indiana University in the US, I will today argue that my experience and my informed observations over nearly 35 years have provided me with insight that may be of value to you, the audience. I hope to explain and show you how I have grown in my understanding of the culture of South Asia, how mass communication and journalism has been taught and practiced here, and how scholarly research, informed by theory developed by foreigners, and now increasingly influenced by scholars in the global South, has brought me to this beautiful city of Multan and placed me at this podium in front of my former students and their esteemed colleagues. My first visit to South Asia was to Bangladesh in 1990. I had only joined the School of Journalism at Southern Illinois University a year earlier, after completing my doctoral studies in mass communication at my current institution, Indiana University. The chair of the sister department, Dr. Joe Foote, asked if I would like to spend a month in Dhaka, working with faculty to set up a student newspaper. Without hesitation, I said yes. Upon my arrival on the beautiful campus of Dhaka University, I came to know that the computers for that newsroom had arrived from the donor, but were locked in a room of unopened boxes. The university administration was fearful of computers in the hands of students. That was my initiation into the challenge that remains in our way today. Administrations hesitant to enact educational reform. My first trip to Pakistan was 6 years later. I had joined a team consisting of Dr. Foote and my journalism colleague, Dr. Jyotika Ramaprasad. We started a series of projects aimed at strengthening journalism education in South Asia, and one of our very first was hosted by friends at 𝐂𝐫𝐞𝐝 University in 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐿. I recall standing on a sandbar in the Indus River, marveling at where fate had delivered me. I had been a journalist in Indiana and a graduate student at Indiana University. And there I was, standing in the ancient river that provided a name to those places. The word had been misunderstood, misapplied, and mistakenly forgotten in the US as having connection to South Asia. But there I was, living the connection. It was a marvelous, and it marked a revelation in me about how connected we are to each other over distance and time. It was profound for me. For the next 20 years, my faculty colleagues and I used funding from the U.S. Information Agency to organize more than 60 two-day workshops across South Asia that brought together university educators with working journalists to discuss how we could strengthen the practice of journalism as well as the educational environment in which students learned about journalism. The project spanned 17 years. We visited 29 cities and brought 80 South Asians to America as part of this exchange of knowledge. We held our workshops in all 5 of the South Asian countries, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, but also in the United States. Every workshop was hosted by a university professor who, like us, wanted to strengthen the instruction of journalism in her or his university. We talked increasing interaction and collaboration with working journalists as a way to increase the relevancy of instruction. We talked about internships and hands-on learning experiences. Each summer, we would invite about a dozen journalists and faculty members for a workshop at our university for a few weeks. We provided examples of how we did collaboration, and we introduced them to journalists that supported our instruction. Those South Asian educators returned home and adapted their programs in innovative ways. We knew that simple transfer of our American methods to South Asia would not work. Our South Asian colleagues told us as much and then showed us how lessons learned in America were made practical in South Asian context. We listened, but we also wanted South Asians to share ideas with other South Asians, not just in our little workshop, but on a larger scale, where people of similar culture and media environments could learn from each other. We Americans had been mixing with Pakistanis, Indians, and others in the region, listening to their ideas, seeing stark differences in practices between their universities and ours, but also seeing remarkable similarities across the border we were so easily traversing. During the U.S. News workshops, South Asians bonded and shared, but they had scant opportunity to commingle upon returning home. So, in 1997, we hosted an international conference in Colombo. 60 professors, press council officials, working journalists, and even UGC, HEC chairmen from Pakistan, India, Nepal, and of course Bangladesh were present. For 4 days, people from across the subcontinent presented research papers and discussed journalism and mass communication. A couple of months later, we published and distributed the conference proceedings throughout South Asia. In the introduction, we said, the goal of meeting was to posit solutions, share successful initiatives, and form strong personal bonds and a professional network among various groups across the region. It was to lobby education policymakers and educate them about the special needs of journalism education, the importance of the field of communication in this global age of technology, and the talent and promise of people shaping this field. We concluded then that we had met the goals, but that was 27 years ago. It has been a long time since I attended a conference where Pakistanis met with Indians and Bangladeshis, where Nepalese scholars conferred with Sri Lankan journalists, and where the Americans who organized it all faded into the background of a conversation between people who had, for too long, been separated by boundary. The region remains separated despite a common culture and an abiding interest in free press. Some of you in this room were in the Colombo Conference that week of January 1997. You know what I'm talking about. In the years after Colombo, Dr. Ramprasad and I continued to host workshops in the region that brought still more educators together with journalists and university faculty and administrators. Our grants ended in 2012, when the US government seems to have decided that journalism in South Asia no longer needed strengthening. My scholarly attention shifted to East Africa, where Indiana University has a long history, but my love of South Asia remains strong, and I'm so pleased to be able to talk to you about that love today. Thanks to you, I can share genuine insight with my US students who know very little of Pakistan and South Asia. I regularly teach a course about global journalism, but I also teach students how to report with cultural awareness. They have filed stories about Afghan refugees settling in Indiana, Pakistani Americans celebrating Eid while war raged in Gaza, and Bloomington Muslims defending their cultural center from attacks by hate-filled Americans ignorant of beliefs and traditions of their fellow Americans who have joined them from South Asia and elsewhere in the world. My journalism instruction has been informed by my Pakistani, Indian, Sri Lankan, Nepalese, and Bangladeshi colleagues. The lessons I have learned from them have empowered me to provide informed and nuanced lessons to my American journalism students. I am perhaps most proud of a student evaluation by one of my international students from Pakistan, who a couple of years ago said, quote, "I have learned so much because you knew about my culture, my religion, and my history. I have not had another IU professor who understood Pakistan like you." In addition to the workshops and conferences that I have hosted in South Asia, I've also worked to bring South Asian educators to America, and Pakistanis have been particularly fortunate. I have hosted 4 postdoctoral students: Professor Dr. Masfur Alam Khan at Rifa Institute of Media Science, Dr. Professor Mohammed Khalid at the University of Lahore, Professor Dr. Mohammed Ashraf Khan at the Institute for Art and Culture, and Professor Dr. Saqib Rais at the 𝐂𝐫𝐞𝐝 Open University. I have hosted other scholars on shorter visits, reviewed articles for Pakistani journals, and served as an external examiner on more than 1 dozen doctoral thesis committees in Pakistan. Through these scholarly activities, I have learned much about how this nation sees itself and understands its role in the world. Reading research, collecting data, editing manuscripts, and presenting findings to colleagues engages us all deeply in an intellectual pursuit of knowledge that permeates our classrooms and university forums. We today here are privileged. We are afforded the luxury of thought, analysis, and contemplation. Many of us have had the opportunity to travel to places that are culturally different from our own, places where we can test our assumptions and have them turned on end. Travel inevitably disorients us, but in the wake of that initial confusion comes a reorientation and new perspective. From that new perspective, we not only see the new and strange, but we see the old and familiar with new eyes from a new perspective. I have been exceedingly lucky. I have not only visited dozens of countries in the global south that few of my colleagues in America have interest in, but on arrival, I have been greeted at airports by university professors eager to meet me and take me into their homes, introduce me to their families and friends, and share with me their faculty colleagues and students as if I belonged there. I've been welcomed into this country more times than I can remember. Same too for your South Asian neighbors, as well as 6 countries in East Africa now. The hospitality I have been shown brings me to tears. This has been my experience so often, that I am regularly surprised to hear an acquaintance say they have traveled to India or Egypt or Kenya and had a terrible time. How could this be, I asked. And then I realized that they are simply the clients of tour companies and travel agents, whereas I am always among friends. I once received a lecture about the construction of the Taj Mahal from a university professor with expertise in ancient architecture. I climbed a mountain with a National Geographic consultant to examine paintings on the side of cliffs in Sri Lanka. I've been taken into village markets in Pakistan by hosts who introduced me to shopkeepers and artists who amazed me with pattern and color on everything from papier-mâché boxes to pashmina dupatta. When I mentioned to folks that I was traveling to Pakistan this month, a few asked me, "Isn't it dangerous there?" And I tell them, yes, it can be very dangerous, because some evening I may be walking through a slum where people live under roofs of plastic and tin, and it may start to rain. And when it does, a kind person will see me in the rain, beckon me into their small home, and offer me tea. And given this lovely generosity, I will drink that tea, and I will likely get sick from the water that they could not afford to boil properly. Yes, I tell my friends, Pakistanis are dangerously hospitable, kind, and loving. I will not claim to understand Pakistan. I remain an outsider, looking in despite an incredible advantage point that my friends and colleagues have provided me over the years. I do think I have a couple of observations about the state of the academy today that may ring true to you, however. Since the early 1980s, when the first educators were granted government-sponsored fellowships to study journalism in America, Pakistani faculty have been generously supported by their country's HEC, the US Fulbright Commission, the UK's Shevering Scholarships, and Germany's International Institute of Journalism. Pakistani scholars have learned theories developed in the West and mastered quantitative and qualitative methods for investigating mass communication phenomena. The early days were dominated by what I call the image of Pakistan in the West era. Scholars and administrators wanted to know what the outside world thought about their country. The analyses were meticulously done, and the descriptions they produced were helpful, even though they were not always flattering to the United States. They were limited in scope, however, and focused on foreigners rather than Pakistan. You are now well beyond that. Scholarship has evolved and increasingly focuses on studies examining Pakistan journalism and its media environment rather than Western media. The young scholars of today, many of them students of my students, are advancing theories particular to region and national conditions. Their methods are sophisticated, and collaboration among them is encouraging. There has been a great bloom of scholarly journals publishing communication articles about topics that are specifically Pakistani. It is my great honor and pleasure to see that so many of them are well critiqued and reviewed by colleagues of great personal stake in the outcome of this research. Your community of scholars today is both mature and youthful, both established and innovative. I am limited in English publications at my university library and may not list all of the Pakistani journals there. Nevertheless, I can and have seen lots of good research lately, and I will comment on by topic rather than by naming authors. What I see is a trend towards greater sophistication that I want to illustrate rather than exhaustively cataloged. Image studies persist, but now they more often examine the image of Pakistani organizations and institutions in the national media. Perhaps most obviously, mobile phones, social media, and other uses of the internet generally have come to dominate the news media. Pakistan's journals have consistently published good research that examines the way these media are used by journalism and public relations, and the general effects that they are having on society. Media literacy efforts have necessarily had to adjust, and there is now good research in the local context to guide reform. News, of course, is not the only form of communication affected by these newest media. As a major exporter of cultural programming, Pakistani scholars have appropriately taken up analysis of pop culture, comedy, entertainment, and other forms of amusement that influence our students and youth culture as never before. This is not to say that fundamental principles of contemporary media and investigations into the essential forms of journalism are not ongoing. They are. Peace journalism, environmental journalism, and health communication remain topics of intense research interest. Health communication studies took on a critically important role during the recent COVID health emergency. Medical practitioners and public health officials looked to communication research for insight into how to manage the epidemic. Pakistan's journals offered helpful studies about how public health messaging was managed in the developing world context. These studies may well influence reaction to future epidemics toward more effective communication. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention what is perhaps the most dramatic and promising trend that I have seen in journals' tables of contents, and that is the steady growth in the number of women's names on the author's lines. Pakistan communication programs have devoted admirable attention to the education of women at the graduate level, and the fruits of those efforts is abundantly clear now. Whereas women authors were rather rare 30 years ago, today women lead studies on all of the topics I mentioned just now, but perhaps most significantly, they are investigating issues that include gender discrimination in newsrooms, public relations and advertising agencies, and even in university programs. Image studies now look at how women are portrayed in all forms of mass media, from news to entertainment to social media. And we are all, therefore, better able to understand how we as a global society can gain greater advantage by the equal participation of women in the academy and the professions, including journalism. And if you will allow just one more observation, I would argue that one of the better histories and analysis of journalism and mass communication education in Pakistan was co-authored by an American and a Pakistani and recently published in an Australian journal. Journals edited in the West remain more prestigious, and collaboration with foreign authors often leads to publication in their country's journals rather than the ones in Pakistan. Collaboration across borders is healthy and on the rise, and the fact that Pakistani scholars are informing Western research audiences is a refreshing turn of events that I know will happen more often going forward. I believe this because of what I have seen in Pakistan's journals in the 21st century. I am further convinced of this assessment as I look over the conference programs for the next 2 days. My hopes for the current era are high. This second annual International Conference on Media and Communication Research, organized by Dr. Professor Shahzadi and his colleagues, is one of the reasons I'm so optimistic. Look at the program. and you can easily see that research is thriving in Pakistan and appreciated globally. And pardon me for focusing on our host institution and not mentioning similar good work at all of the other Pakistan universities offering degrees in journalism and mass communication, but my hopes are also high because of the good reporting that I see on BZU WEB TV. The students are reporting on events and topics of considerable interest and relevance. I am today delighted to see mass media technology in the hands of university students. I also look to the recently formed Association of Media and Communication Academic Professionals, which pledges to bring together the leading media academicians of Pakistan. I know many of you are members. 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐴, ICA, and IAMCR, they're all great organizations, but AMCAP is what Pakistan needs most at this time, an organization focused on this region and particular to its needs. Again, please allow me to be presumptuous, but I have for decades argued that South Asia's journalism students deserve textbooks written by their professors about their country and about their culture. That analysis of journalism education I mentioned earlier was conducted by David Bakino and Amir Ilas in 2021. It noted that nearly every one of the 14 faculty members interviewed in Lahore said that most of the textbooks and materials used in Pakistani journalism and mass communication programs are still either from the United States or the United Kingdom. I promise you, there is not a journalism professor in the United States that uses a majority of their textbooks from Pakistan. The imbalance is not as dire as it was 40 years ago, but the imbalance is still great. As you are aware, Pakistan's HEC has recently redesigned its textbook writing support program. The recognition of the central role of locally authored texts in improving the quality of education is a significant step. The program promotes the production of high-quality textbooks in physical and digital forms by Pakistani authors used for use as recommended or required reading in undergraduate or graduate level classes. I ask my AMCAP and all of you here today encourage the HEC and university administrators to expand promotion criteria to include textbooks as well as full-length volumes of research. These would be books based on the findings of 40 years of scholarship about Pakistan mass media. Pakistani educators have developed a deep understanding of mass media in the Pakistan context and from the Pakistani perspective. These lessons are no doubt shared with students at the bachelor's and master's levels in classrooms and laboratories, but the textbooks they are asked to read are too often written by Americans and Europeans. Pakistani students deserve textbooks filled with examples and lessons from Pakistani journalism and public relations. Their textbooks ought to orient them to their future rather than towards mine. All of this is not to say that there are no instructional materials for Pakistanis by Pakistanis. No, the Open University creates a considerable amount of instructional material to support its courses. There are several competent texts that prepare students for CSS, PMS, PCS, and other competitive exams, but they have little local perspective beyond a few history of great men. Dr. Ullah Khan wrote a wonderfully useful text about news media and journalism in Pakistan, but that was back in 2011. We need more. We need them recognized as critically important scholarship contributing to promotion under HEC criteria. my friend, Dr. Peter Msegi, excuse, that was not technical difficulty. My friend, Dr. Peter Msegi of the African Center for Media Excellence in Kampala, Uganda, teaches a fundamental lesson to the working journalists who attend his class. He tells them, quote, "There is no African journalism, no American journalism, no Asian journalism, and no Australian journalism. There is only journalism, plain in its truth." He then goes on to say that every journalist comes to every story with a perspective. That perspective must be informed by the journalist's own culture, own history, and own experience. Thank you all for providing your research, your instruction, and your perspective to the students of Pakistan, and thank you for providing it to me.